diversity and inclusion has been, it's a hot political topic. It's a massive topic with investors, within companies in and around the world. It's got a lot of heat and light. Interestingly, when we look at diversity and inclusion through a maturity lens, we actually don't ask any specific questions about diversity and inclusion within our own diagnostic. But it is embedded in a number of different areas. I guess the first thing to say, and I thought what was quite interesting, and I put on as a social media post in the last couple of days, was a US company called Costco, who I've been following and actually teaching about since 2006, believe it or not. We actually rated Costco on Index in 2015. We rated them as an A company, an A-graded company. So really up in the sort of exemplar category of organizations. And Costco are interesting because they've always put people at the center of their organization. So the obvious contrast with Costco is Costco and Walmart. And the reason I got interested in the company was quite an in-depth comparison of Costco and Walmart, which was done by a professor called Professor Wayne Cascio in the US, published in 2006. And he looked at the Walmart's model of doing business and Costco's model of doing business. And ultimately, they're both in a similar business, which is about providing, good quality products at low prices for local communities, so their customers, shop at these places because they're going to get goods at a very good price. The big difference between Walmart and Costco historically is that Walmart have paid low wages. They have treated their people as a cost of doing business, and compared to Costco, that pays super high wages and sees people as very central to how they run their business. In fact, from its founding starting point, people have always been the differentiating factor for Costco, and their premise is simple: that they want to pay people well, they want to reward and recognize them, and in return, people show high levels of commitment, huge amounts of discretionary effort in terms of how they go about their jobs, and that feeds into how customers are served, how they innovate, how they adapt as an organization, all those really sort of high performance elements of cultures which really sets them apart. Interestingly, if we go back to 2006, this analysis showed some of the business outcomes of both models. The amount of stuff that staff stole from Walmart was extraordinarily higher than those at Costco, and the numbers were just in their tens of millions, and that was always a figure that I quoted to leaders and investors. So there's a fundamental ethos within an organization like Costco which is very different, and from a maturity perspective, that's where we start, which is what's the underlying ethos? Do you seek to manage people as a source of value? And does everybody matter to sustained and sustainable value creation? And that sets our fundamental starting point for how an organization like Costco approaches inclusion, which is to say, diversity and inclusion largely arises out of the business model, rather than something which is imposed upon it. Does that make some sense?
Just for reference, Stuart, the comparison on the financials between Costco and Walmart, how does that compare in terms of profitability and overall reach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I haven't looked at I looked at Costco's share price since the mid-90s, and if you'd invested in Costco in the mid-90s, your return wouldn't be in the hundreds of percent, it would have been in the many thousands of percent. So I think it was about a 14,500 percentage point return on your investment, which is simply phenomenal. So if you'd invested $100, it'd be worth a sizable sum today. I think interestingly, if you look at the multiple which Costco trades at, it tends to trade at a much higher multiple of like price earnings ratio is a much higher multiple. So investors like the stock. It's as if they accept that the way Costco runs its business from a people perspective is not a soft and fuzzy thing. It's very hard, and it underpins their long-term performance. So fundamentally, shareholders have been handsomely rewarded if they've been long-term holders of the stock.
No, thank you for that. So in terms of their approach to looking at, I think that the one thing that keeps on coming up on the discussion of DEI is the equality of outcome and the equality of opportunities. Now, the way that I interpret good DEI is that everyone's got to have the opportunity. Don't exclude people. But the moment you force it, you get results that you weren't aiming for. And so if you could, yeah, what is your view on from that side of the topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important point. So much diversity and inclusion has been imposed upon organizations. It's seen as kind of separate, but we have to kind of do it as opposed to something which is fundamental to who we are. So, for an organization like Costco, if you look at what's happened in the last week, they've deliberately pushed back on the idea that they should get rid of their own approach to DEI, and they specifically use the word inclusion. They actually don't use the word diversity. They talk about inclusion and inclusivity. And that tells you something very important, because what we are looking for in a mature organization is one that's built a set of systems and a culture which enable everybody to thrive. Okay, so it's not about gender, it's not about race, it's not about other minority groups. It is actually creating a mature environment in which everybody has the potential to thrive, to flourish, to realize the kind of value contribution that they have the potential to make. And when you create that kind of organization, you create diversity in itself. You create highly inclusive organizations, and diversity tends to flow as a consequence. As you say quite rightly, when it's imposed, problems arise. So, for example, in a European context, certain countries, certain governments have sought to impose quotas on things like women at board level. I think Norway is one of those. And the problem when you start to say that, X percentage of board members or senior leaders need to be women, or they need to come from an ethnic minority, then you're changing the way an organization approaches the whole subject. So we talked a little bit about gaming systems in our previous session. And what you find is that, and certainly what we found in the UK, is that often companies will game board members. So often you see, more black women being hired onto boards, and that is really about a tick box exercise. It's not about actually creating a more diverse and inclusive organization. And that creates, it doesn't solve the problem, and it also creates problems internally, because people that are brought in to tick boxes are not viewed with the same degree of trust and respect that somebody who comes in and succeeds because of the system and cultural context. They're just accepted as part of the talent of an organization. So yeah, I think this is a really important point, and why we stress the need for organizations to approach diversity and inclusion from a mature perspective, and not one which is a top-down approach, just to seek compliance with diktats or regulations or guidelines.
It's so counterproductive. The whole, I think we could have been further ahead with inclusion if there wasn't such a hard push for inclusion. Because at the end, it's all about performance. And the word quota brings to mind in the 90s in South Africa, we were not fond of the quota rugby players. And it was so unfair against those players that was included in the teams because they were labeled as quota players. And so there was people from government watching the rugby field and counting the people of color at all times. It was terrible. But it was never about the issue of quotas. I don't know how Rassie fixed it, but at the moment, nobody in the Springbok team is a quota player. They're all there and much loved by everybody.
And I think it's interesting as an outsider looking in, understanding that dynamic. I think that's a fantastic example of where, if you set targets and seek to impose diversity and inclusion on an organization, you get perverse and ultimately bad and damaging outcomes for everybody. Ultimately, what seems to have happened is that South African rugby have embraced the idea of true inclusion and built systems and a culture where everyone can succeed and thrive. And as you say, what you get are players which are highly respected, highly trusted, and the captain of a team, a black captain of the team, who's become a role model, not just in South Africa, but I know he's been held up as a role model internationally, which I think is exactly the kind of outcomes that you want to create. But they've been created through mature leadership and mature management practice, not from regulation or compliance or government or authority diktat.
And if I continue on the subject of the rugby, pre-94, our Springbok team was picked from a group of 3-4 million. Now we're picking from a group of 60 million. So it's about the inclusion that just gives you the opportunity to thrive and be better than what you previously were.
Yeah.
So the inclusion is the key to DEI, not the forcing of DEI and having DEI officers that police it. And now that's obviously not an easy thing to do, especially when people aren't flow naturally into those type of roles and positions, especially in South Africa. Soccer is the main game in South Africa, but somehow rugby became of interest to everybody, and it's a difficult thing. If it was easy, everybody would be able to get the results. So I still don't have the answer how to get a truly diverse, included company that performs. Have you got some insight? I would love if you have some answers for me there. Because it's a rocky road. It's a controversial road, but those who've got the results like Costco and the Springboks, they're showing that there is some value, or there is enormous value in it.
Yeah, it is hard, but it's obviously not impossible, and there's plenty of organizations that have solved it or resolved it to a large degree. And as ever, there's a various number of interrelated factors which are fundamental. Obviously, the first one is a belief that everybody matters, and and human beings and people within the organization that otherwise touch the organization are sources of value. And as a starting point, you need to change the underlying ethos. and too many organizations still don't have an ethos where people are seen as fundamental sources of value. They're still managed as a cost of doing business. Costco, realized that a long time ago, that was a point of differentiation. And as soon as you make that leap, as soon as that ethos changes, then everything else looks different, because fundamentally every single relationship is viewed through a different lens. So, when everybody matters to the success of an organization, then automatically you're starting to think of systems in which people can thrive and the systems which are not allowing people to thrive, but also the cultural characteristics that need to be fixed. And often, some of those are very common to lots of different organizations. So an underlying ethos should be common to all those organizations who are seeking to be inclusive. But I'll give you some examples. So in the UK healthcare, so in the National Health Service in the UK, simple things which don't allow women to thrive as well as men. So scalpels, for example, so the actual equipment which is used in an operating theatre was designed by men for men. So there you have a simple problem, a system problem, which is a barrier to women being able to succeed as well as men. So in each organizational context, you're going to have specific issues that need to be fixed, and you're going to also have specific cultural issues that need to be fixed. So, for example, does everybody at leadership level share the underlying human ethos that everybody matters? Because if everybody doesn't share that, then you've got a fundamental problem right at the start. And I think, as you've mentioned, the South African rugby coach Rassie has obviously brought in an ethos which fundamentally he has imbued in everybody around him, and that permeates the whole human system of South African rugby. And when you do that, and when you demand, that's the kind of environment in which this team or organization is going to thrive and succeed. People automatically will start to raise issues and address concerns which come up. I think the point you made just a few minutes ago was really, really important, which is inclusivity widens the talent pool, right? So our starting point was, if you're not truly inclusive as an organization, then automatically you're fishing in a smaller pond, whether that's you're fishing in a male-dominated pond, or you're fishing in a pond of students that have had to go to certain universities or have certain characteristics. You're fishing in a smaller pond than you might otherwise fish, and that automatically is constraining your ability to attract all the talent that could come and bring value to your organization. You said South African rugby's pool, its pond has gone from a few million to 60 million, and an organization like Costco realizes that if it is seen by local communities and the outside world as a truly inclusive place, a lot more people are going to want to work for it. If you are a woman that's had a family, and you understand that you can go and work in an organization that is going to value and respect you and allow you to thrive, then you're going to return to work to that kind of organization. I mean, at the moment we're doing a lot of work in the legal sector, and particularly in the UK, it may be true in other parts of the world. Female, highly talented, highly smart, extremely high performing women, a lot of them leave the biggest law firms because they find it difficult to work in a place that doesn't allow them to succeed, because they have childcare responsibilities, and they end up going to work in-house, or they go and set up their own business where they can thrive and succeed. So there is a talent drain because those organizations are not allowing people to thrive in the way they were. I mean, I'll give you an example, which I did 20 22, 23 years ago, I worked with Quaker Oats, which is now part of Pepsi, and the head of HR for Europe came to me and said, we've got a problem because 95 to 99% of women leave this organization after they've had a child. And we went to do a piece of work with them, and we didn't do a diversity and inclusion piece of work. We did a piece of work which was about building systems and fixing the culture so that everybody could thrive. And actually, one of the cultural, the thing that one of the big changes in mindsets came when we showed how people on the board who were typically white men in their 50s, how it wasn't just about childcare, it was about dependent care. And that really resonated, that actually this affects everybody in the organization. So we need to create a more inclusive organization, because we all have responsibilities outside of the organization for our families, whether they're elderly parents or elderly grandparents. And that thing really triggered a reaction that this wasn't about women, it was about everybody in the organization. And actually there was a better way. And what we were able to do was to build a bunch of systems and practices which helped everybody in the organization, not just the women. And ultimately that was signed off very, very quickly, because we made that link through to business performance. So that human thing, that diversity and inclusivity was linked to everybody creating a better performing organization. And Costco have known that from the start.
So what I'm hearing is that, so Stuart, what I'm hearing is that DEI, diversity and inclusivity, is important for a company, but it's got to start with a belief that people are important, and not that certain groups and all these identity politics. It's not about that. It's about belief in humanity and individuals, that everybody is important, everybody can contribute. And if you got that belief sorted out, it makes the execution and the building of a culture so much easier and natural and authentic, as opposed to getting people in and tasking them at a low level to go and fix your DEI. And that just will backfire in your face, right?
Exactly. I'll give you one personal example from this is now going back quite a while. So almost 30 years. I was running a business within my first career employer. I was in Leeds, city of Leeds in the UK, working for Arthur Andersen. I was building a team, and I was hiring my second cohort of graduates, and I interviewed this girl who was absolutely brilliant. And the HR director came to me after the second interview, and she said, "Oh, what do you think? What do you think of this girl, of Emma?" And I thought, "She's fantastic." And at that point, she said, "Well, we've got a slight challenge." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "She's pregnant." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." So she was coming to me as in her early 20s, new graduate. And my response was, "Okay, so I'm assuming she's coming here because she still wants a job. How do we create a situation where she can work for us?" So we put her on a flexible schedule. We communicated to her clients. She became part of the team. She was the highest performing individual in the team when she came on board. She was absolutely phenomenal. Clients loved her. The team, loved her. And the organization loved me for hiring her, because she was the first graduate, I think, that was ever hired globally for that firm who joined the organization when they were pregnant. So we'd broken that boundary. But to me, it was like, I have a highly talented individual. How do I create a system, and
how do I make it work
in which she can come to work? It was as simple as that.
And that's a approach that works wider than just with people. If you have a problem, you shouldn't say, "Oh, this is a problem, I need to fix it." The first question should be, if this is the challenge, how do I make it work? And if you got that mindset, we just need to apply that mindset to humans as well. I wanted to, earlier you spoke about the environment in the theaters that was catered for around the male doctors. There's one group that is terribly neglected in the world. That's us lefties. I'm left-handed. And a scissors is built for right-handed people. I don't know. Are you left-handed, Stuart?
No, I'm not. But it's it just shows.
You won't realize the struggles of left-handed people. A scissors is for right-handed people.
Yeah.
A bread knife is for right-handed people. 99.99% of rifles are for right-handed people. So us lefties have just adopted, and we made ourselves included in the world. But yes, so there are small little things that can be done to make the life of a left-handed person easier. So obviously there's stuff that can be done to make a female surgeon's life easier, because we all adapt. Humans are very adaptable.
That's right, and I think your point. If you look at that in a wider context, you look at disability, for example, and the lack of adaptation in a lot of workplaces. And I'll come back to where we started, which is the starting point for being a truly inclusive organization. If you're managing people as a cost and you don't see them as a source of value, you don't understand the magnitude of the value of one talented person that can come into your organization, then you don't want to adapt. It's easy. Your mindset is, well, let's just go and hire somebody that fits us rather than us adapting who we are so that person can come and thrive. And I think that's that mindset is fundamental to inclusivity and inclusion. And if we revert to Costco, I mean, the interesting thing this week, why it was in the news, was because its investors backed their assertion that they should not rip up their DEI policies and their approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that said something in the sense that their shareholders are invested in a company, and their investors understand that this is a company that is fundamentally inclusive at the outset, and that inclusivity is fundamental to its long-term performance. And if as an investor I go with the political winds and push back and say, no, you should be getting rid of these policies and this approach, then what are you doing? You're actually harming yourself. You're harming the performance of your own portfolio, and that's not a rational thing to do as an investor. So even hard-nosed investors are not necessarily investing in Costco because it's a wonderful, progressive, human-centered organization. Probably a lot of these organizations are investing in Costco because of its underlying long-term performance, but they understand that long-term performance has come from being highly mature and highly inclusive. And
so
and
we could
undermine that.
So we could summarize this whole discussion by saying that the opposite of DEI is opportunities lost. And the purpose of a mature organization's approach to DEI is to seek opportunities for the benefit of the organization. And that's why it works, that's why it flourishes, and that's why Costco needs to continue down that road.
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary. Fundamentally, if you're not inclusive, if you're not mature in that context, then you're missing significant sources of value. You're missing out on large amounts of human potential, but you're also carrying risk because you're fishing in a narrower pool. you're creating an organization that ultimately is likely to be less diverse, and that in itself creates long-term risks.
Thank you, Stuart. That's very insightful, and have a wonderful week.